Hello, and welcome to another intergalactic episode of Info Hazard. Today, I'm going to bring you something a little out of our normal wheelhouse, a little more galactic scale stuff than we normally talk about. You usually talk about national news, political news, that sort of thing, but I want to talk about something different this time. I want to talk about something called the Fermi paradox, as it's usually called at least, which basically boils down to the idea of if there's aliens, where are they?
The Fermi paradox, is that at all related to the softy paradox or the wobbly paradox?
No. It's named
Just
after an
Fermi.
Italian physicist, or Italian-American physicist named Enrico Fermi, who worked on the Manhattan Project and was famed for coming up with these brain teaser-like questions. And so he's not the first one to mention this, of course, as you might expect. Lots of people have been wondering about this kind of thing for a while. In 1686, there was a book written by Bernard Le Bovier de Fontenelle called Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, where he constructs a dialogue in which claims of intelligent beings existing in other worlds, for instance the moon, are refuted by a character who notes that if this were the case, the moon's inhabitants would already have come to us before now.
That's very impressive, and to be able to do all that with a hole in your head, because he has a fontanelle, which
What
is
is a
when your
fontanelle?
skull doesn't close all the way. Like when babies have fontanelles, because their skull needs to form still, and it closes over. Yeah, that was a stupid pun that required a lot of background knowledge. My specialty.
Well, I liked it. I learned something new.
Fontanelle.
If I can't entertain, I can at least educate. The Info Hazard promise.
We'll definitely do one or the other. Maybe not both. Hopefully both. So,
Well, I mean, that's a weird argument because, wouldn't the people on the moon have said the same thing in 1686?
well, so actually that is kind of, we'll get further into it, but that sort of is one of the theories, is that, everyone's just kind of sitting around the edges of the dance waiting for everyone else to ask them out.
AKA invade them.
Well, maybe.
So, okay. Well, but what did the people from the moon have to say on this matter?
I don't know, because they haven't come to visit us, right? Or what does Neil Armstrong say? What are you asking?
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering how 1686 moon men responded to this particular line of thinking.
Oh, yeah, but that was his whole point in 1686, was there were no moon men, or we would have seen them. But so if interstellar travel is possible, even really slow interstellar travel, like we can basically almost already do, I would only take from 5 million to 50 million years to colonize the galaxy, which, it sounds like a long time on like a personal time scale, but on like an evolutionary time scale, it's pretty short, right? The Earth is 4 billion years old. And
that's a serious goalpost moving. You're not worried about whether or not it's possible for us to do it, but whether or not we'll still be human at the end of that
No,
timeline.
I wasn't saying that. I was just saying, like, on an individual time scale, it's a lot, but like, yeah, like 50 million years, you're not going to do a lot of evolving necessarily.
I won't be able to do it, but will humanity be able to do it, or will they be something else by the end of it?
Regardless of whether it's still humanity by the time it happens, like, it would still be aliens.
Somebody would be finishing the galactic expansion. So that's the normal sort of formulation of it, is like within our galaxy, why do we not see any aliens? There's one that's not talked about as much, a different sort of form of it, which is why are there no signs of intelligence anywhere in the universe? Which doesn't assume interstellar travel, but you can look at distant galaxies and you could see something like if there were Dyson spheres appearing, stars would disappear, or like anything. Like you can see really big stuff really far away, and we don't see anything like that. And
yeah,
so,
you would
Right, like
think
a
you'd see
galaxy
Dyson spheres. What's a Dyson sphere?
so that's like a construct that completely encloses a star in order to capture and use all of its energy.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I do remember that Sam Altman talked about constructing a Dyson sphere as a potential way to power data centers for AI, so I assume that's a realistic thing that one could do, and therefore, if there were intelligent aliens out there, they would certainly just be doing that.
Well, I mean, maybe. There's something called the Drake equation, which is a way to estimate the number of alien civilizations that exist in the Milky Way galaxy currently. So if you want to estimate n, the number of civilizations with which communication is possible, it is equal to the product of several different factors. So it's the product of the average rate of star formation, the fraction of those stars that have planets, the fraction of the planets that can support life, the fraction of planets that could support life that actually develop life, and then the fractions of planets with life that go on to develop intelligence, and then the fraction of intelligent civilizations that develop technology that show detectable signs of their existence in space, and then L, which is the length of time for which those detectable signs exist. So if you multiply all those together, then you get the number of civilizations that currently exist in the galaxy. You may notice a problem here, which is there's no way for us to know any of these factors. All four of the
Not a
last ones
one.
are completely unknown. This sentence from Wikipedia I found really funny, which is almost all arguments involving the Drake equation suffer from the overconfidence effect, a common error of probabilistic reasoning about low probability events by guessing specific numbers for likelihoods of events whose mechanism is not understood, such as the likelihood of abiogenesis on an Earth-like planet, with estimates varying over many hundreds of orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the factors on here is like one of the core questions at the heart of biology. When and how did life start on that planet? So this equation is like, okay, we're just gonna like assign, let's say 6 to that number. 6 is the likelihood, and just move on.
It's it's one D20, I think,
Yeah.
for abiogenesis. I mean, yeah, there's that point, and I mean, I think that point is good enough to make discussions on this pretty much useless. But I feel like the model itself, I think there's lots of room for doubt, like intelligence, like what is intelligence?
Well, in this case, it's the ability to release detectable signs into space over some period of time.
I guess
Like
so.
how that's
To
not
leave
intelligence.
evidence, yeah. What? I mean, that doesn't even work from a human standpoint.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Okay,
Like,
sure. You can't define it, but you'll know it when you see it. If they show up and we can talk to them or whatever, then they're intelligent.
Sure,
like
but it
prior
just seems
to
like such
the launch of Sputnik, we put no evidence out in what we considered space that
we have radio
humans were
signals.
around. Yes.
But they only travel.
Let's just say prior to
years.
radio signals, then there's no evidence of intelligent life by that definition, but we wouldn't say that like the ancient Phoenicians were unintelligent.
I mean, maybe an observer could have seen the changes in our atmosphere due to the Industrial Revolution, or they could have seen changes in our atmosphere due to like the growing amount of trees and whatever, a couple hundred, I don't know, tens of millions or 100 million years ago. So
Yeah.
like,
But if
I don't know,
intelligent life was defined by the amount of off-gassing carbon that we put into the atmosphere, then intelligent life peaked in the Carboniferous for our planet.
I think ultimately it kind of doesn't matter what definition it is, because it's like, you're trying to calculate this for like what you think the number of intelligent life is. So you calculate whatever your definition is, then you calculate these factors according to that, right?
Can I pause for a second? I think we just passed by a milestone. Like, I'm prone to nerdy statements, but I think I just made my nerdiest statement ever.
Really? Which
like
one was that?
If intelligent life is marked by the off-gassing of carbon into the atmosphere, then intelligent life peaked in the Carboniferous. I think that's the most nerdy ass shit I've ever said in my goddamn life.
Oh, that's
Congratulations.
Pretty good. No,
It's a proud moment.
My problem with just the intelligence factor in the middle of this is it's just like it already just is showing such anthropocentric views about this whole thing, right? I mean, like that's like one problem. It might be that we are observing aliens. We just don't know that they're aliens. Sure, we're not observing, post-Cold War American aliens. We're not observing that, but it's like they might as well say, whatever, the probability that monkeys will then go on to learn to use radios, it's like,
not
like
zero.
You're kind of narrowly defining these things. I mean, even like planets is another one. It's like there's nothing about life to me that seems to be inherently only like that it would only exist on planets, right? What about moons? What about like
the forest moon of Endor, dude? What about that?
Yeah, right. What about like the clouds around colliding stars, right? Like
Sure, yeah, but like we are in this equation limited by our conception of life as it has formed and as we think of it on our planet. Carbon-based life forms that can exist where there's liquid water. and all the other factors that make life on Earth. But, we're assuming kind of that, but like if there's a form of life that can exist by the reproduction of like tungsten based metallic beings out in the Oort cloud, we'd have no idea because it would be so alien to us we wouldn't even recognize it as life.
Maybe. Anyway, we can talk about how this is like nonsense however you want, right? Like, but ultimately, people want to like come up with some guesses, right? So they had the first scientific meeting on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI. I had 10 attendees, including Frank Drake and Carl Sagan, and they speculated that the number of civilizations was roughly between 1,000 and 100 million in the Milky Way. So,
Sure.
yeah, basically,
Why
you
didn't
can
they
make
just say
whatever.
12 if they're going to ballpark it like that? There are 12 of them.
Yeah, so, conversely, Frank Tipler and John D. Barrow took a pessimistic view, and they scaled all these pessimistically, and they speculated the average number of civilizations per galaxy is much less than one. So, yeah, whatever. So, depending on what you guess, you can come up with, any kind of number for whether there are civilizations or how many there are. So now let's talk about what people do to explain this. Why are there no aliens? We can't see anything that we can point to and be like, that's an alien. Why not?
For the sake of this argument, we're saying that is the case because obviously there are plenty of people who believe that there have been credible sightings of aliens, and whether or not you or I agree with them, that's we're just taking as an assumption that we live in a dark universe for now.
So as far as popular theories, there's sort of the like great filter category of theories, basically being like there's something that, interrupts one of these stages. Maybe life is really common, but intelligent life is really rare. Or maybe intelligent life is common, but gamma ray bursts are much more common than we previously thought. And you're actually pretty likely to have your entire planet sterilized by radiation at random. And so civilizations never had the time to develop. Rogue asteroids are way more common than we thought, and your planet might just get kablooied out of nowhere. That kind of category of theories.
I've heard a theory that complex life is actually very unlikely to be formed, and we might see single-celled life all over the place, but not so much multi-cell.
Yeah. Which so there's this principle that gets used in this, which is it's called the mediocrity principle, which is you should sort of assume that like Earth and humanity are not some like crazy special thing, because like it is sort of unlikely to be wildly different than everything else.
But I mean,
why is that?
That I'd say the evidence seems to be that Earth is actually very, 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 very special, right? Like what we've got going on seems to be exceedingly rare, right? If we don't see it anywhere.
But there are various explanations for this. So another one is that civilizations don't communicate. There's a dark forest theory, which is it's too dangerous, and there are interstellar civilizations out there, but they ruthlessly eliminate any competitors, and so anyone who does communicate ends up getting killed. And so everyone just kind of hunkers down and tries not to say anything. There's the classic, so there are no aliens. Of course, we kind of talked about this. David touched on it a little bit. Well, maybe it is really rare. Maybe humanity are the only aliens, and it's just so insanely rare that there's abiogenesis, and then it evolves to be intelligent, and then it involves technology. Maybe each of these steps is so fantastically rare that for all of them to line up is just like once in the entire observable universe, or like on average less, maybe, like those guys were saying.
Let me try to put it like this. Consciousness will only exist where consciousness exists.
The anthropic principle. Because we exist, therefore, the probability is not zero. Is that what you're getting at, basically?
No, that's not. Well, I'm not, but it's more like a response to this, like, oh, we should assume that we're average or something, right? It's like, well, when it comes to consciousness, like, well, like, even in our proximity, like, we see, like, rocks and, like, puddles and clouds, and, like, let's say those things aren't conscious, and, like, asteroids aren't conscious, and the sun isn't conscious, and so, like, actually almost everything we see isn't conscious. So, like, so we know that it's, like, that it's rare to be conscious, and yet, like, we're conscious. We know it's much more likely than not, if you're like some collection of matter, that you're not going to be conscious. So anyway, so there's this like so you are not normal, and in fact nothing that could be experiencing this could be normal, right? So that like principle just seems to like be like never true for questions of like life or consciousness. Like if you're a living thing, you can only ask the question, of this. What kinds of things are alive if you're alive, which is rare. So like you're not normal if you can
I
ask
don't
this question.
I think this principle, the mediocrity principle, applies to this in like when you're setting up this Drake equation kind of way of thinking. Like you're saying that like stars form and planets form around the debris of those supernova stars. And you're trying to assign a value to the likelihood that the matter gets smushed together in a certain way, like it did for the Earth. And somewhere out in the universe, there's like another equivalent Earth that produced life forms like us. The mediocrity principle is just saying that, like, okay, this is all basically random, like the way that the matter has scattered across the matter and energy has scattered across the universe, but it all has the same sort of physical laws applying to it. And using those physical laws, what's the likelihood that this situation happened in an equivalent way somewhere else? You're just
Right.
applying that the mechanisms apply uniformly throughout the universe.
Okay, but we don't know the mechanisms. And so like given that you don't know what the mechanisms are and you're just trying to give them numbers, the idea that you would like assume that yeah, I mean I don't know. Anyway, I guess they just make up mechanisms and they're
No,
like,
the
hey, maybe the
mechanisms are
mechanism's kind of like
physics.
this.
I mean, we know some of the mechanisms, right?
Like
Like
no,
stars coalesce out of clouds of hot gas and collapse under their own gravity, and then the
but
accretion
we don't know.
disk.
I mean, but we don't know the right. So we know some of that, but like yeah, abiogenesis, for example, right, or like complex life, or
Yeah, right.
intelligence,
No,
right?
we totally don't
But
know.
Again, this is just, that's the mediocrity principle. And you're just assuming it's all like the same physical laws that apply throughout the universe.
There's nothing special about the matter on Earth. It's not categorically different than matter in other solar systems.
sure, but we don't even know like what is it about Earth that made that makes it so like it's like yeah we can say like oh we have water, so anywhere we see water like oh then that could be like where life is, and it's like well it could be Jupiter like
Yeah, no, totally. Definitely.
distracting the asteroids. It could be the whatever the Mars. It could be our moon. It could be our tilt. It could be like our magnetic field. It could be the flipping of our magnetic field. We don't know what about it. It could be just how old our star is. Like it could be all of these things. We don't even know, and we don't have like the mechanisms of it. So it's like to me it makes sense to say like yeah, but it's probably pretty rare. Probably
It's
extremely
interesting
rare.
So,
to hear
okay.
you kind of like give that explanation, but you sounded so confident about what does and doesn't have consciousness. It's kind of like,
I was trying to say that for simplicity. Like, yeah, I mean, like, look, I'm not saying that, like, I can't prove what does or doesn't, have consciousness. I've read about it, but, like, I think, like, you can talk about, so, like, if things need to have some amount of complexity to be conscious. So you'd say, like, okay, a crystalline structure of a rock. It's not conscious because there's no complexity to it.
you could have very complex
And
crystals.
gas,
And I've
not
heard
really.
that the amethyst has healing properties. Take that into consideration in your equations.
To me, this like idea though that like Earth is so special and we're the only ones just kind of seems like the olden time people who thought the universe revolved around the Earth. It's just like we haven't seen enough of the bigger picture yet, and so we think we're the center and we're special, but we're not actually. I think is more likely to me, and so it's more interesting to speculate about like why it seems that way. Like there's
Yeah, I
so
don't
much
know.
space in the universe that like even if intelligent life is like pretty rare, surely it's happened other places.
Mm-hmm.
Although there is this like this other theory that like it takes a certain amount of time and we're the very like either the very first, we're the universe's special boys, we're the first race to achieve the light of consciousness, or among the first, but that just seems like more of the same, like we're special.
Yeah, but well,
Yeah, I mean,
the thing is,
there's
it's
a
not.
lot of theories here, but like, which one do you think is
I'm going to talk
more
about that
likely?
at the end. I'm going to talk about
Okay.
which ones I believe.
All right.
And then there's like a lot of different sociological explanations that people have added. Maybe aliens are all extremely isolationist and they don't want to encounter other aliens and, that sort of theory. Maybe they don't want to develop complex technological societies.
Yeah, it's not sustainable, right? Maybe they want to live sustainably. They don't want to expand exponentially outward, burning ever more fuel.
Exactly. Maybe we're the only grabby aliens in the universe, or maybe we're going to mature out of it by the time we're space capable.
Or perhaps that tendency to want to expand and use up our resources is the thing that kills us. And perhaps there have been other intelligent aliens out there who had similar tendencies and burned themselves out before we could observe them.
Right, that's that L thing, right? So yeah, lots of like extinction, burning themselves out before we came along to watch them.
Putting in the great filter theory. So then there's a theory that like civilizations are only using radio for like a very short period in their technological development, and there's the alien internet is out there and it's just whizzing by us all the time, but we can't see it. So there's this thought experiment that like in Papua New Guinea, the tribes were like isolated from each other in different valleys, and the only ways they had to communicate with each other were like drums, so they could like drum across the valley to the people on the other side, or they could send a runner, right? So if you ask a tribesman from there, how would you communicate with somebody really, really far away, he might suggest like a big drum or a fast runner, but he can't come up with a radio. Maybe we're this guy and we're just looking around for the big drums, which would be...
We haven't discovered the ability to manipulate them, like quantum entanglement. The idea that manipulating one particle or can affect some other entangled particle somewhere else, and maybe you could manipulate that to send messages.
I think that the most likely explanation is in the Great Filter. And I think that basically any creature that evolution produces is going to be tuned towards like selfishness and competitiveness. And so once you achieve a technological capacity that would enable you to achieve starflight and real civilization, you end up self-destructing. Stephen Hawking has this, like you can look at it as like thermodynamics. So life is an ordered system that sustains itself against a tendency to disorder, right? So things fall apart, eventually everything breaks down. You can't hold it together. So Stephen Hawking thought that maybe once knowledge is what drives changes in the race rather than just biological evolution is the point at which the system becomes unstable and self-destructs as you get nuclear weapons or antimatter. You can imagine the level of technology where you achieve big space flight and real post-scarcity stuff. Maybe that puts the level of nuclear weapons in everyone's pocket. Imagine a mass shooter has access to nuclear weapons and there's no practical way to defend against it. He just has to disassemble as a driver and pull out the nuclear reactor. There are actually historical examples of this, even within human history. In Polynesia, when they were expanding, between 1500 BC and 880, they would go through like huge boom and bust cycles where they would expand rapidly and the populations would grow really fast. And then they would fight like bitter, annihilating wars over the depleting resources until the population collapsed. And then the whole cycle would start again, with Easter Island being the most famous example of this.
Right, because we have the heads, but like the people who created them weren't around when Europeans discovered the island.
Yep, because they were in the like bust cycle and everyone on the island had died off.
Every single person on the island. So we don't know of any people who survived.
Yeah, no, it was total. So like there was no one left. They could have left instead of dying, maybe, gone to other islands, but they weren't there anymore because the island couldn't sustain human life. Due to, I think it was like overgrazing, basically caused like an ecological collapse and no one could survive there anymore.
Right. Yeah. So I guess we don't really know if, certainly there are people on Polynesian islands, and if not at that.
Yeah, no, so like not everybody died, but 99% of people died. And so maybe the idea is once you have more and more technology, then the collapses, like the boom and bust cycles are amplified by your technology. And eventually you hit a point where either the whole race dies off or they can't sustain like a civilization level presence.
So like these ideas, the Fermi paradox, right? And Enrico Fermi, he's partially responsible for the creation of
the nuclear
weapons.
Yes, indeed.
So it does kind of make sense that the people who were thinking about the potential for interplanetary civilizations to annihilate themselves were creating a weapon they potentially feared would annihilate our planetary civilization.
Famously, they weren't sure when they tested the first nuclear bomb if it was going to ignite the entire atmosphere or not.
It's a good thing they made it, huh? Yeah, it was definitely worth that risk.
I mean, I don't think they saw it as much of a risk, right? Sure, they weren't sure.
Yeah, they thought it was a low chance, but they didn't think it was impossible.
They were doing the sort of napkin math there too, with everyone's lives all at once, just kind of like assigning a value to the likelihood of destroying the Earth.
I feel like these guys would have been great Facebook engineers.
If Enrico Fermi was around or Oppenheimer was around, we would have had a functioning and popular metaverse.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, maybe that's why we don't see the aliens, is because they're all in the metaverse.
That is actually
their
a
home
theory,
planet.
is that it's basically pointless to travel around the stars because it's way easier to just plug yourself into virtual reality and do it there. And so that's what everyone does in their own solar system, and no one ever looks out. So yeah, so that self-annihilation is what I think is the most likely explanation for this.
Well, Danny, you're a big pessimist, though.
That's true.
feel
I
like
do.
this
I
is
do have
where
a
this-
lighter-hearted theory, though, if you want to hear that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so my lighter-hearted theory is that life is much more common with water, and the amount of water that we have is like unlikely that you have enough water to have like oceans and stuff to evolve in, but not so much water that you have like land and stuff. And I think most water, like most planets where life evolves, are completely covered in water, and so therefore they have no ability to have fire, and they never develop metallurgy or any sort of technology. So there's actually tons of intelligent races out there. They're all just hanging out on their like water worlds and their, space dolphins. And then Wikipedia for this theory has this quote from a science fiction author named David Brin, which I thought was kind of a fucked up quote, which he says, in which case, the evolution of creatures like us with hands and fire and all that sort of thing may be rare in the galaxy. In which case, when we do build starships and head out there, perhaps we'll find lots and lots of life worlds, but they're all like Polynesia. We'll find lots and lots of intelligent life forms, but they're all dolphins, whales, and squids who could never build their own starships. And this is the fucked up part of the quote. What a perfect universe for us to be in, because nobody would be able to boss us around, and we'd get to be the Voyagers, the Star Trek people, the starship builders, the policemen, and so on.
I
Not
guess
that
that's
bad.
fucked up. And I think it is.
Sorry.
It is. I mean, he's imagining just like uncontested interplanetary exploration, because he said the Star Trek version of this.
He did say that.
He
That's
could
true.
imagine it as uncontested interplanetary colonization or dominance,
That's true.
which I think
but
is
it's just
probably
the
more
first
likely.
thing he says is nobody would be able to boss us around. I don't know. Just
Sure.
Right. He sounds like not being invaded and annihilated. Right.
Totally.
I mean, he sounds, not nearly as bad as Donald Trump.
No,
So,
totally. I don't know. It was just a
Sure.
weird little thing that jumped out at me. Like, I've read some of his books. I think he's probably a quite reasonable guy.
There you go.
So-
That's him. That's him hurtling over a low bar.
So no, I think that the one where like right, it would be you can't start a fire, that hurts your technological progress, and also if you ever got to go to space, you'd have to like bring a big tank of water,
Which is even heavier than
Which-
air,
so so it's just like way harder to develop that. But yeah, that one's funny and interesting. I feel like the answer is behind us, and that I think that a lot of the things that have led, that you see it there, and a lot of the things that, or whatever. If I had to guess, I'd say that life like us forming and surviving this long is a very, very uncommon thing, like shockingly uncommon. Some of the things that, some of the examples of this are, okay, we have all sorts of heavy metals in ourselves and in our cells and our technology, and you have to go through multiple generations of stars to produce those heavy metals. Something like us couldn't have formed in the first couple billions of years of the universe. And then also our star has this long life, right? Whereas, many stars are bigger and they burn out fast. So even if you've got like just the right planet, then it doesn't last. Like you were saying, lots of stars shoot out crazy radiation. I think little things that don't seem like they're the key to life actually could be important catalysts for evolution, like the moon, basically, it's like a stirrer, like with our tides, right? Like our tilts with like the seasons. It's like just the right amount of mixing it up that it puts a little bit of evolutionary pressure on that speeds things up. And and also, the progress from single cell to multicellular life could very well be a large hurdle. And so I think that we've gotten past a lot of things that seem quite unlikely individually.
So you think the Great Filter is behind us then, not ahead of us?
That's yes, I guess so. Or I don't know. A great filter is like saying that one of these steps is basically zero. I mean, I think that each of these steps is very unlikely. Like, I would kind of expect us to see lots of single-celled life out there.
I declare that explanation extremely reasonable and therefore boring. And also
I have a
probably
different
likely.
theory.
But all right, Phil, what's your theory?
I have a theory. Okay, my theory is that this is all moot because the aliens are here, you see. The reptilians are in control of our government. Ever wondered why Donald Trump has that vagina below his chin? It's because it's his skin suit falling off, and underneath there is a horrible reptilian head. Now, there are good reptilians and bad reptilians. Actually, we don't need to get into all the details. You can just get onto my GeoCities page, and I'll explain it all to you there.
Although, actually, that does remind me. I forgot to mention one of the big categories of theories, which is the like aliens know about us and they don't communicate with us, either because of some sort of like prime directive thing like Star Trek, where they don't want to interfere with our cultural development, or just because they find people distasteful. Just look around at all the horrible shit referred to yesterday's episode about the news of the week for reasons why you might not want to get involved.
Or they're just embarrassed. They're like, ugh, humans cringe. And they just move on. Or maybe we're just not that interesting to them. Maybe we would be interested in them, but they don't care about us. Maybe we're not unique in their eyes in the same way we think we are.
Right, but I mean, you'd think that, like, even if they didn't want to communicate, they would at least be visible in some, like,
Exactly. There would
way.
be evidence, we would see starships flying around or Dyson spheres going up or, something. But
I mean,
if you know why there aren't aliens,
leave a comment.
If you are an alien, leave a comment.
If you are an alien and you think we're cringe, why are we cringe? Why don't you like us? Let us know. Plenty of other people who hate us comment. You can just comment with them.
All right. That's been another slam banger of an episode of Info Hazard, taking you
another big bang episode.
Out of this planet. And tomorrow we'll be back with a smaller scale, less galactic story.